I call this meeting to order. If you would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Eric will give the invocation.
Our Father in heaven, we thank thee for this beautiful fall day that we have been blessed with. Father, we are grateful to thee for the time and effort that has been put in by the speakers for this study session. We ask thee to please bless our speakers and our aldermen with thy spirit, that they might consider those things that they are presented with, and that they might use that for future decisions and endeavors that will help make this city even better. And we ask these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Eric. Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call, please?
Lucas? Denham?
Here.
Cooper?
Here.
Milton?
Here.
Eldon?
Here.
LeBlanc? Schultz? Your Honor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We are here to listen to a presentation for our feasibility study for our convention center expansion. Angie, are you leading this off?
I am going to kick us off, yes. Are you ready?
I'm ready if you're ready.
I'm ready. Well, I'm excited to be here today, Board of Aldermen Mayor Kathy. I think it was day 2, Mayor, you and I met when I was on the job last October, and you said, "Hi, my name is Larry Milton, I'm your mayor," and I said, "Nice to meet you," and you say, "Where are we at on the feasibility study?" So I'm excited that we are finally here today, just a few months later. We have partnered with Hunden Partners and TVS Designs. TVS Designs was actually one of the original designers of the convention center space, and Hunden was part of that original study as well. So we're excited to bring them back and partner with them again on this. We had a kickoff meeting, several calls to understand the market and where it currently sits, the vision of the future. They came on site in market, and we toured several of our other properties, met with stakeholders, met with hoteliers, and ultimately came to the presentation that we're going to see from them today. I did bring the experts with me. They are on the phone, and so we'll go ahead and kick it off with Hunden Partners and TVS Design. And then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So we have Lexi, Rob, and Lucas, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and take it away. Oh, and Paul from TVS Designs.
Hey, Paul. So glad that TVS is with us today. And Angie, thank you so much. My name's Rob Hunden, CEO of Hunden Partners. I've been in this space for nearly 30 years and have a great crack team that's been working on this effort for you. It's pretty well wrapped up. And so we're here to present the sort of summary findings for you today. So a lot of exciting things going on, obviously, in the marketplace. The fact that you needed to do a study because there was, pent-up demand, what we would say supply constraints because of demand opportunity and those kinds of things is a story that you're going to hear a little bit about today. So I will turn it over to Lexi primarily to run the show, and she'll take us through it.
Yep. Thank you, Rob. So as Rob just stated, kind of setting the scenes of why we're really here today to talk to you all about this study that did a competitive market analysis, understanding what the historical performance of the convention center was/is, as well as the hotels, but the market in general, and how that really stacks up or compares to competitors within the convention center and industry, since it is very saturated and there are quite a few competitors. With that, we kind of determined what that optimal expansion scenario would be for the site at hand and how that really synergizes with the destination. What does that mean in terms of the programming, the types of events, the types of visitors that would be attracted to not only continue this kind of momentum or baseline scenario, but also have that incremental performance, which we'll get into with our demand and financial projections and economic impact analysis of how it will impact the community overall. So kind of starting off with our methodology and key questions that we really aim to answer. So where are you now? How do you stack up? What are those opportunities? And then how we get there. So at the conclusion of today, once we get into questions, you'll hear Rob and I talk a lot about how we really take what we have learned and how we can use that as an asset moving forward and get things done. So in terms of overall situation analysis, want to do a quick overview. Obviously, you guys are very familiar where the convention center is, but overall, a lot of conversations with different meeting planners, and a huge draw for them really is that entertainment destination appeal that the convention center is able to offer, with Branson Landing right across the street, as well as being able to utilize the Hilton Branson Convention Center, and then the Hilton Promenade also across the street. So understanding the needs from a hotel demand, what those associated room nights really look like from the current groups that are accommodated, and then when there is overflow demand, understanding how that Hilton Promenade plays a role. And then looking at our potential expansion area, I'll let Paul talk about the drawings at a better detail in a few slides here, but our rendition of trying to be architects is just really highlighting what those potential areas could be, which you see shaded in blue attached to that current convention center space. Quick summary of those that we reached out to, not only again from that local stakeholder perspective, really wanting to understand not only the convention center and how it really is part of the fabric of Branson, but how it plays a role in the larger goal of where Branson wants to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Also spoke with meeting planners and user groups of the facilities to really understand again what those event needs are, what that space constraint really is right now. A lot of groups that are growing are concerned just with the overall space being able to accommodate in the current exhibit hall, being able to accommodate their event 5 years down the road once it is expanding. We also took a look at the potential of an entertainment facility from an indoor perspective. There are quite a few convention centers that have been able to have that flexible landscape to operate almost as an indoor arena of types and have different events. So wanted to understand what that market opportunity was from a programming perspective. So we got to speak with ASM Global, the new Thunder Ridge Nature Arena, Live Nation, Feld Entertainment, who mainly does family shows, as well as some minor league hockey, just to understand if there is interest, if there is demand, would it make sense for the convention center. Overall key findings from our convention and hotel perspective. So the performance post-COVID has gotten stronger, although there are slightly less events. They are quite impactful, and there is just that lack of availability due to limited space and the inability to host simultaneous events. So there is that demand and that want to have events at the convention center. It's just wanting to overlap in terms of event availability that is causing a significant amount of lost business. The meetings and conventions are the segments that are generating the highest shares of revenues. And again, that total event revenues increase year over year, despite that overall decrease in events. So just higher impact of events. Our hotel demand, so there are less connected hotel rooms and walkable hotels compared to competitors, which does hurt the overall meeting planner package and appealing to meeting planners for those larger events that require a higher room block upon booking. So there is a need for a traditional headquarter hotel or larger room blocks available that's dedicated to those larger events in terms of those attendance, but also spanning over multiple days. There are competitive hotel RevPAR exceeding pre-pandemic levels in terms of the overall local market, and there is that strong leisure demand within summer months that does, again, limit that availability for event attendees. So overall, our market opportunity really leads to additional exhibit and divisible ballroom space that could attract new types of business to Branson, as well as just increasing that calendar availability, accommodating that demand that's right now being left unaccommodated or being forced to go elsewhere throughout the state. There are those opportunities for regional and national sporting events to supplement the winter months. So really looking at that calendar availability, not only from a convention center standpoint, but also from Branson as a destination. Obviously, January, February, March are historically the slower periods of time in terms of that general travel. So looking at those event types that could supplement visitation in those months, really being indoor sporting events, but also larger trade shows that could be accommodated with an additional exhibit space. additional hotel rooms that would be able to leverage a more attractive walkability range of offerings. So looking at different either flags or different brand types to be able to accommodate just different visitor segments that's not necessarily cannibalizing any demand that the Hilton is currently seeing, but ultimately bringing in new demand and new hotel room nights. And then increased impacts to the city. So looking at the special district, but also tax impacts, and then also those net new spending that takes place over that 30-year time frame that we looked at from an economic and fiscal impact. Arena, so looking at that entertainment programming kind of landscape that I alluded to earlier. So from our conversations, but also from just the overall market, the Branson market is an attractive opportunity for both an expansion team within the ECHL or USHL, so minor league hockey. It is growing within the region from a professional as well as youth perspective. The ideal arena for that minor league hockey would be a maximum capacity of around 5,000 seats. And the seasonality would ultimately help boost demand in those shoulder seasons. However, when talking to promoters from an entertainment perspective, so family shows, due to the scheduling or programming of these family shows, they do not necessarily overlap with what that established leisure demand is for Branson. So those typically run within those winter months where they don't necessarily see that same visitation or established market as when comparing it to the summer months. And then also with that addition of the Thunder Ridge Amphitheater, it is expected to have a strong appeal for fans and artists, not necessarily leaving a lot of talent or differentiation in terms of acts for an indoor arena of that kind of minor league hockey capacity size. And that amphitheater season has expanded, so being able to accommodate shows and events at a more year-round calendar availability than before. So during those months, there are those fewer visitors when they're not hosting shows, which is when an indoor arena would take place in a calendar, but not necessarily seeing that strong of interest from a promoter perspective for right now. So one of those things that was identified as a potential opportunity, just not necessarily something that made the most sense for the convention center and the types of events, and also just the site and landscape that it is currently situated in. So overall, our recommendations from our market analysis, interviews with meeting planners, user groups, convention center, the following were developed as our recommendation. So that exhibit hall expansion, expanding the current 46,000 square foot exhibit hall to accommodate those growing event needs from current user groups and allowing for that lost business. A divisible junior ballroom to complement the existing grand ballroom. Outdoor plaza terrace space to be utilized as outdoor programming space, serving as pre-function space as well as social event reception area for larger events. And then hotel, so additional connected or walkable hotels plural preferably, but obviously when looking at priorities, a minimum of at least one connected or walkable hotel to enhance that overall walkable package. So putting it into a square footage perspective here, so increasing the footprint of the current convention center from that 85,000 square feet to that 150,000 total square feet. And you can see that is largely coming from an increase in exhibit space as well as that junior ballroom. In terms of a headquarter hotel, looking at about 300 rooms from a main headquarter hotel perspective that would have its own function space to really generate its own demand, but also be able to be used for ancillary events. So around 22,000 of its own respective event space. And then in an ideal world with additional hotels, just wanted to give that landscape of room count of what would be ideal to increase the overall walkable package by about 550 rooms, but that priority headquarter hotel on its own being that 300 rooms. We have some concept plans here from TVS. So Paul, I'll let you touch on these real quick before we get into the financials.
Great. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So here you can see the existing hotel is on the right-hand side in this upper level plan with the existing ballroom, which we're proposing to renovate the ballroom and include additional subdivisions, which are in line with some of the recommendations of the program. You can see to the left there where it's marked level 1, that would be the convention center expansion, and then to the left of that would be the hotel. Now for the convention center expansion, the 40,000 square foot recommended exhibit hall expansion would be connected to the existing exhibit hall with operable partitions, so you could have contiguous exhibit space. There are provisions shown for retractable seating and also portable seating, so you could set up sporting events easily in the hall. There would be a lobby to the left of that, which could serve as a lobby registration space for the new exhibit hall space. You also see in the lower right-hand corner of the exhibit hall, there would be a lobby that you could drop down from the upper level concourse, which is where the main concourse of meeting rooms is on level 2. So in the bottom left, you can see that there, where that connection would take place. That would be an extension of the existing level 2 concourse at the convention center. That would also have a terrace with views out towards the waterfront and the river, and then meeting room block, and then there would be escalators on both corners, which would bring you up to the upper level, level 3, which is where the junior ballroom space, the 16,000 square foot junior ballroom would be subdivisible with a terrace on the lower left-hand corner there, which would also have great views back to the waterfront. So that's really a summary of the convention center program. Now, on one of those earlier slides, it showed a adjacent parcel of land for the hotel. We studied this and seen that you can fit the entire program for both the convention center, the hotel, and the parking on the land that's currently dedicated to the convention center parking. So on level 1, you've got the main lobby for the hotel with a bar and a 3-meal restaurant. From there, there's 2 elevator banks for the public on the upper left. That would be to get up to your room. On the lower right, that would access to both the parking deck and also to the other function spaces in the hotel for the meeting room blocks. So levels just above that level 1, you can see there's a ramp up to parking. So you'd have 5 levels of parking, which would accommodate both the existing convention center parking that's being displaced, the new parking that's needed for the convention center, and also the hotel parking. Something not shown on this slide, but that's been anticipated in the master plan and is shown in the appendix, is potentially increasing the capacity of the existing parking deck, which is just onto the page top right there off on the other side of Sycamore. Okay, so moving up from level 1 to level 2 of the hotel, now you're actually up elevated above 5 levels of parking, but here would be your first meeting room block for the hotel, which dedicated meeting space for the hotel, and then a dedicated ballroom for the hotel above that. And then moving up one more level, you've got your amenity deck, which both the function spaces for the hotels and also the amenity deck would have terraces that look out towards the waterfront. And then you have your hotel room tower, levels 5 through 15, which would be 300 keys hotel and a rooftop bar restaurant, also with a terrace with views back towards the waterfront. That's just a very brief summary. All of the loading would be there to the back on level 1. You'd have the loading for the hotel and also for the convention center. Those would be extensions of the existing loading area for the convention center and would be really back up to the train tracks. And the plaza, that central plaza there between the hotel and the convention center, would serve as arrival points for both the hotel and the convention center expansion.
Great.
And then just quickly in terms of those estimated construction costs, Paul, so we included kind of those estimates from what that expansion would look like, the addition of that 300 key hotel, and then the structure parking needs, not only within the hotel, but like you mentioned, across the street, as well as the renovation of the existing convention center. So anything that you want to expand upon before we get into the financials?
Just a few things to consider. There would be ways to save cost on the construction cost, and one big way would be to locate the structured parking on an adjacent parcel of land that could be connected via a bridge. The cost goes up by about $5,000 per space when you include it as part of that function block for the hotel.
All right, perfect. And then, so after looking at the cost of the project, it is obviously a pretty sizable investment. Now, when we look at the impacts of the financials, that's kind of where we get to the return part of the analysis. So why make this investment? The first thing we wanted to include here was some information about room nights. We believe that this project, the hotel and the convention center expansion, would likely generate over 50,000 new room nights to Branson. In blue, the majority of these new room nights we assumed would be captured within the new project hotel. But as you'll see in that dark gray, about 11,400 may be captured offsite within other hotels locally. Not only will this project generate demand for group room nights, but also leisure and new corporate room nights. We can go on to the next slide to look at more of the spending and employment impacts. So after we modeled the convention center as it is today going forward, and the convention center with the expansion going forward, we determined that the project would help over double the impact to the Branson Convention Center locally. So over 30 years, that means that the net new spending because of this project would likely total over $1.7 billion and support earnings of over 760 million on average each year. This is about 318 people in full-time equivalent positions. In over 30 years, this is expected to generate about $57 million in net new local taxes over the 30-year period. Not to mention that during the construction, it would generate a significant number of temporary construction and additional local sales taxes during that period. It's hard to say exactly how many of them there would be from local individuals. It depends on who we hire during the construction process. There's many options there. We didn't want to make any assumptions and give you guys firm numbers on that now. On this slide, we have a ton of numbers, but I really want to direct your attention to the right, where the green little bars are. So this is where we show where we see the improvement in events and attendance. In terms of the greatest number of events would be an increase in meetings, not to mention banquets. But in terms of the greatest increase in attendance, that would come from sporting events. So these are youth sports events that simply the facility might be too small for now, but with the expansion could host much larger and more events. So we'd see about 72 more events per year, 169 event days. And then in terms of attendance, about 63,000 more individuals per year. And this is just individuals, so it doesn't count how many days they're in the market. If we want to go to the next slide. So this is where we look at the pro forma, a bottom line of the facility. On the left, we have it as is. On the right, we have it in expansion. If you compare them, you'll see in an expansion over the first few years, 3 to be exact, you might expect to run more in the negative than you do today. And that is just as the facility stabilizes with higher fixed costs and variable expenses. But over time, after year 4, you can expect the facility to become more profitable. And we expect by year 5 for that the facility could run in the green or in the black, however you like to say it, but meaning a profitable facility, which is a good and not so common fact for convention centers. So I'll give it back to Lexi to talk about the market.
Yeah, so we just wanted to wrap up with a few slides here, just showing kind of how Branson Convention Center currently competes within It's not only the regional from a state perspective landscape, but also from the competitive set. So as you can see here, these are all the Missouri Regional Convention Centers from a size comparison, Branson ranking second to last or fourth or fifth, excuse me, however you want to look at it. But it is limited in exhibit space with 77% less space than the average of that total regional supply. But when including the expanded scenario, you can see that it greatly increases in terms of its landscape comparing to the regional offerings. So a much more sizable offering of exhibit space, but also that ballroom space increase as well as meeting space, much more even keeled in terms of those offerings and the types of events that would be competing, not necessarily with your Kansas City or St. Louis, but more so your Wichita, your Overland Park, and St. Charles even. And then in terms of the competitive convention center supply from a total landscape, looking at all of the competitive convention centers that Branson regularly competes with or loses business to. As you can see in this chart here, so the current convention center in Branson, difference from the average, the greatest difference is that exhibit space. So comes from what's currently existing with that 46,000, where it offers 50,000, nearly 51,000 square feet less than that average of the total competitive set. But when we look to include what the proposed expansion would be, it closes that gap and allows for a competitive advantage, especially in that ballroom size, offering nearly 14,200 square feet more than the average of the competitive set and just under 11,000 square feet less in exhibit space. But you're also looking at larger convention centers like your Oklahoma City, Cox, Myrtle Beach, that do offer quite sizable exhibit space. So just wanted to end with where kind of Branson would end up in the overall competitive landscape or competitive set, before we dive into any questions that you guys might have.
Okay, time for questions. Mayor?
Let me start off by, I want to compliment Rob and his Hudden Partners for providing this study. It was, I believe it was in great detail. It provides a lot of data, a lot of supporting data. I think with this being the first draft, this is the first opportunity we will have as a community to now start dissecting it, and it'll probably raise more questions than answers. And Paul, thank you for your work on the architectural side. I have a few questions to go through. I'll start with the small ones. On the financial analysis, I see that you used M-Plan on some of your calculations. I fully support the including the indirect and induced revenue figures. My question that I had when I read this study was, I'm not sure what numbers are in there. I agree with the methodology, but when we look at the induced and the indirect, the induced is estimated 194 million of tax revenue and 425 million from indirect. If you would revisit those calculations with the understanding that Branson is geographically small and the employees that will be working at this hotel convention center, I'm not sure what number to use. I believe citywide we have about 250 employees, and I'm told about 20% live within the city limits of Branson. So some of these indirect and induced costs, I think a lot of those induced revenues will come from out of the area which Branson won't receive. I called and talked to M-Plan about my questions, and they agreed. If it was large metropolitan areas or statewide, they would be more correlated to these figures, but I'd just like to readdress that with you.
Yeah, I think it's a great comment, Mayor. And yeah, I think when we do these kinds of things all over the country, the size and geographic um, swath that we're talking about, where people work versus where they live, does come into play. And I think sometimes, yeah, sharpening our pencil and having a look at that, knowing that you're the center point of a very vast area, your residential population is very small. People come to work and, drive to work and commute from all over the place. And so, yeah, a lot of even though the region will be impacted likely, as we've stated, if we're just looking at city limits, those numbers actually may come down a little bit, simply because you say about 20% of folks who work in town live in town, and so that's not an unusual situation. So we'll sharpen our pencils there, take a look at those assumptions, and probably claw those back a little bit to account for that.
Yeah. And there again, when we go look at the county for some possible funding assistance, or the state, county and state are going to receive a lot of those indirect and induced revenues. A few comments on the hotel. My understanding is Angie could book more events at the convention center if she had more hotel availability. Both the availability, the lack of rooms available, and the price of our current rooms, it hampers Angie she turns away events that she could have with different rooms.
Yeah, I think we're kind of maxed where we could be right now in the size of the event that we host because of the walkability of the hotel package.
Yeah. In your hotel, when you were discussing the hotel, the analysis says there would be a demand for 550 additional hotel rooms. Is it the limit of the footprint that we have is what caused your recommendation to be 300 rooms versus the 550?
So let me clarify that a little bit. So first off, I will underscore your and Angie's contention. We agree with it wholeheartedly that even without expanding the center, not that we want to necessarily shy away from that, but even without a center, and this is true for so many convention centers out there, the lack of the quality, walkable, blockable rooms is your biggest impediment right now. So you could improve your business simply by having more and better, closer hotels, right?
Yes.
Without expanding the center. And so, if I were to say like, hey, we got a triage situation, what's the number one thing? I would say that would be your number one thing. And then you can get into, again, the balancing act of, okay, we could support more space and have a 2-piston engine of smaller events happening at the same time, or we could host larger events. But then again, we need that larger hotel package. So it's not so much that the market supports, just carte blanche on it, without any assistance, 550 more rooms. That's what gets you to that balancing act of having the room count and the space count in the properties in the complex kind of being more at equilibrium. So yeah, I don't want anybody to think that, because I'm sure some of your hoteliers will say, well, if there's room for 550 room hotel, why isn't it being built? It's because the rest of the package isn't there, and so that's what would bring it into balance. So, Lexi, am I saying that correctly? Yeah.
I would say so. I think from where the 300 key hotel came from too, is really looking at that bare minimum scenario, but also having an ideal sizing where then you're able to offer additional hotels at somewhat of different qualities. So being able to not only appeal to your convention center attendees, but also your youth sports and your traveling teams. And that's really where that differentiation is helpful. Having an upscale headquarter hotel is a great asset for a sales team, and being able to really market to meeting planners, but then also being able to have that differentiation in product with the select service hotel at 150 keys only then allows you to strengthen that overall offering and go after different types of events that would be able to cater to all different types of visitor segments.
Fair enough. On the parking garage, how many additional spaces are we looking at?
There were two options here too, so just to clarify, I know the one that is part of the hotel had a different number than it was if it was off-site, correct?
Correct. So
Yes.
I put in here, it would add 500 spots to the existing relocated and 425 with the new expansion. And then the additional 361 parking spots that would be incorporated into the hotel tower.
To be a total new structured parking of 1,286 cars.
Okay, I know this is preliminary, but just to throw it out there for future discussions, I think that would also warrant some type of a traffic study. Having 1,286 parking spaces down there and knowing the events have a date coming in and a date leaving, Veterans Boulevard is no box of chocolates today. And the only other access would be from Main Street, which is 4 lanes, but it ends into a 2-lane going in different directions. So some just thought of, are we going to be creating a traffic nightmare by trying to put all of this in its existing location? And all of our roads, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to mention, I totally agree. Traffic study would be a great thing to do. I also want to mention that oftentimes we will do a shared parking analysis, which can help identify and solidify that number of spaces that are actually needed based on the demands of that whole kind of campus. So that may be something to consider as well.
Yeah, and our existing downtown is a pretty hot topic today about its lack of available parking. So,
And I would say that the current flow of traffic into our existing garage is not ideal either, because that Sycamore entrance gets used way more than the Commercial Street entrance. But trying to direct people to that Commercial Street entrance, Michael was so kind to print some new signs for me. But, that street that MoDOT covers, I would love to put a sign there, but directing people down to that street. But I think that the current flow of traffic isn't the best either with the
Yeah.
existing garage.
okay, and then that will lead me into some bigger topics. You're aware, I believe, of the new sports complex that's been having some meetings and discussions about coming into Branson. I don't know that I've heard a square footage number from them, but I believe it was about 127,000 square feet. The sports complex, from what I understand, is I'm going to say a mega sports complex. I won't go down my speech of Branson is such an excellent market for sports complex and conventions because of what we already have here. Excuse me, I've heard of too many adults that have their kids on traveling teams, and they are somewhat influenced on which games they attend. A big complex in the middle of a cornfield versus something in Branson with all we have to offer. So I think there's plenty of room for both needs. So the question that we need to discuss is, by adding 40,000 square feet of exhibit space will put us just under 100,000 square feet. I think it's 97,000 square feet of total exhibit space. And if at the same time we're talking about a $127,000 sports complex, that raises several questions. One is, and Angie and I have had a brief conversation on this, how much of the expanded convention center space would be competing with a sports complex? I know we have some sports there now that have shared with us they need more space, so they're going to have to find a new location. So that expansion could go into our convention center expansion. It could equally go into this new sports complex. My initial concern with that is if the city's, I'm assuming the city's going to be asking for some financial support. If I understood the math correctly, out of the $400 million total investment, there was I believe is a $128 million gap in the capital stack that needs to be filled. So I know enough to know that the city's going to be asked to put up financing support for this convention center. I can safely assume the new sporting complex is going to be asking us for some financial support. And the last thing we want to do is to use taxpayer dollars for two competing properties, right? So one question would be, ask your team, Rob, to get with the sports complex team, get a better understanding of what it is they're trying to do compared to, because some of what they're wanting to do in their sports complex could be held at our convention center expansion. The other question to ask would be to Angie, could we absorb this expansion without competing for that sports market business, right? So those are some pretty high-level questions that's been raised.
Do you want me to
Yeah.
address
sure.
that at all? Okay. You know, I was part of the very early conversations of the sport court facility, and it sounds like maybe the scope has changed slightly from when I was involved in those conversations. My meeting with them is on Friday to learn more about what direction they're going. You know, we went and looked, Jordan and I looked at our event portfolio and realized that there's probably 3 or 4 events that we currently have that could potentially move to a sport court facility. And those are all in high demand weekends that we would be able to replace with either a meeting, convention, or a sporting event that potentially would not go to a sport court facility. You know, like our dance and cheer competitions. They need the rigging, they need the dressing rooms, those kind of things that a sport court facility would not house. So I think it depends on the size and what their vision is and what type of sports they're going to go after. I think there's also an opportunity for us to partner with them to get some of those bigger events that can use both facilities at the same time. And we've seen that with our ballparks, right, where Ballparks of America and the Recplex have combined together to host larger tournaments because the availability of fields. You know, I think that also one of the elements of this expansion is, and they alluded to this earlier in the presentation, is being able to host simultaneous events at the same time. Our current layout and our current space restrictions really only allow us to host one event with the exhibit hall space, the ballroom for general sessions and meals, and then the breakout space. If we were able to add on to the existing space, you know, one event could be on more the southern end of the exhibit hall and utilize that junior ballroom and those meeting rooms on that side. And then another event could be using the more northern part of the building simultaneously. And then they could all use the hotels that are on either side as well. So, you know, I think that the expansion is great for bringing in those bigger events, but it's also going to allow us to host simultaneous events because we've got events that we have to turn away now. I mean, Chief Schmidt brought an opportunity to me earlier today, and if we had double the space, we could host him that event as well as another event that we currently have booked that's been with us for years and years and years. So I think that there's those 2 options, right? The bigger events and simultaneous events happen at the same time, and utilizing shared services and making some of our sporting events true citywides, utilizing more of the facilities.
Thank you so much for that, Angie. I want to make 2 comments, and then I want to hear from our board. Something that's, I don't know if it is a way to actually calculate it, but I know we can calculate the economic impact of either this convention center expansion or both the convention expansion and sports complex. The economic effect to this area will be monumental, huge. And then in addition to that, some of us here believe that one of our challenges from our chamber is getting first-time visitors here. Once we get them here, history tells us they come back again and again and again. So bringing in these 2 different markets that we're talking about will bring in those first-time visitors will just naturally result into our increasing visitation. With that said, Aldermen, who would like to share their words of wisdom or have questions?
Just on the sporting part of it alone, and I understand your question about it competing with, and I get that, but my son travels in a travel basketball league, a Puma sponsored basketball league. And this summer we were in Iowa, Podunk, Kansas, Shawnee, Kansas, sorry, Artie. We was in Iowa, Nebraska, I mean, everywhere. And we played in several of those facilities where it was, what in the world? And then all of a sudden you drive up and there's this massive facility. But for exactly what you said, there was one we played, I think it was up around Shawnee, and there was this beautiful facility with 8 gyms. And then this league is so massive that they use 3 different facilities within like a 30-mile radius. So every gym would be booked in that 1 8-gym facility all day long. So we might have a 2 o'clock game, ends at 3. We've got an hour to drive 30 minutes over to the other gym in the neighboring town, play a game there, drive back. I mean, it was, you know, so I mean, I think it could complement one another, the facility and the convention center for sure. I think that's all I really wanted to add, because I've lived it for the last few summers and been all over the Midwest planning these facilities. And every time I go there, my wife is like, man, I wish we could afford to build one of these 8-gym facilities. It's just so, and I remember like some nights they would finish the last basketball game at 6, and before you could even get your kids off the court, they're raising the volleyball nets, and here comes all the volleyball girls. You know, it's just like all day, every day. Crazy.
Volleyball is really, I don't know what happened to the volleyball marketing team, but they have exploded in the last 2 or 3 years, where volleyball competitions are popping up everywhere. You know, to your point, when I was in my previous destination, we hosted USA Volleyball, and they had, was it Ashley, 35 courts in the whole building, 36 courts in the full building. If we're talking about a sport court that could maybe host 12 courts, and then we could host another 12. We might compete for some of those national competitions. And as soon as you say national, you're bringing people in from larger than that 6-hour drive radius that we are focused on.
Every tournament we've been in, there's, you know, Chicago, Canada, I mean, they're California. They're from all over. These kids are driving halfway across the country to play in Nebraska or whatever at these. It's just, it's so big and so unreal. And boy, I'd love to see a minor league hockey team.
Wouldn't that be cool? The arena idea was my idea. I wasn't sure if it was going to pan out, but you know, I was like, I gotta give it a shot.
I'm loving it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So, serendipitous moment, because I want to touch on that for a second, Angie. And I don't know how far this has gone down the tracks or how set in stone it actually is, but I think in my heart of hearts, I'm kind of a proponent for the arena idea. I think we would be in some ways missing out if we didn't have that. Now, I'm not in your world, and I don't know how much, you know, expanding sort of ballroom capacity versus sort of a different type of infrastructure would help you, but it seems to me that it's sort of a more unique type of infrastructure to add on would help. And I don't know in the grand scheme of things in this study what won out, the negatives of the arena or the positives of the other thing. And if it's the positives of what we've been presented, then I understand. I do have a couple maybe disagreements with the reasons why not to do the arena as just laid out in here. You know, when we talk about the seasonality of Branson, you know, that's something we want to attack. That's not something we just want to sort of sit back and just accept of what we have, right? And it speaks about like family shows, right? I don't know that that's even necessarily the extent of the type of entertainment concert that we might want to have in this town. I mean, I look at Thunder Ridge, and they just had like a reggae concert, right? I don't know when the Rolling Stones became a family show, but, you know, right? So I understand that that is a competitor in a sense. Jason got a kick out of that. I don't know if that's, you know, that being a competitor is just something that puts us out of the market, but I do think in my heart of hearts that an indoor arena would have a benefit to that as well. I also, boy, I've I've talked to promoters that feel the opposite, feel that a venue like this would be crucial for expansion in Branson. There are these things called radius clauses. Angie, you probably know about them. And we compete right now with the one in Northwest Arkansas, the amphitheater down there, and then the amphitheater at Lake of the Ozarks. And they have perfectly aligned their radius clause circles to where they kind of squeeze out Branson. Now, that's never going to affect Thunder Ridge, really, because Johnny Morris is a wizard and can work around those kinds of things, right? But if you get the right promoter, of which I actually think there are some opportunities in this town for that right promoter to emerge, and I've actually had some really interesting conversations, they can work around those radius clauses. And anyway, so I'm just kind of sharing that. I hope that idea is maybe not completely dead, because it's kind of where I'm leaning, but I also see the huge value in this version of it as well. So.
Angie, if you would,
sir.
real quickly, would you touch on what this facility could do for our January, February, March
Yeah.
timeframe?
Absolutely. I think that timeframe is a perfect opportunity for us to host those simultaneous events, right? Meetings and conventions. I was just talking to a planner earlier today where he wants September to October dates. And I was like, 10 years ago, we had a hard time as venues selling that timeframe because so we had demand dates. We're like, come on, like, let's move into October because we had all this availability, and now that's like the hot time frame. So I think we could almost, as an industry, shift the mindset of the planners, incentivize them to move to that time frame. I also have an idea of like maybe utilizing some of the show talent that maybe closes down during that time frame for whatever, and offering like an entertainment credit to come in and still put those artists to work and also show that live entertainment element to Branson during those time frames. And if we start seeing a higher demand, that maybe that will increase the visitation and increase show activity during that time. But I think that time frame really, we could do a lot of more of the youth sporting events if we had available weekends. But we also that simultaneous event, because our occupancy during that time frame really doesn't dip from the convention center standpoint. So if we could double the amount of people that we're bringing in with the additional space, that could really help traffic in the community.
Yeah, and that would affect so many of our existing businesses.
Yep.
Ralph?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you mentioned the volleyball. My girls all played competitive volleyball. My youngest daughter went to USA Junior Nationals 3 times. And it's in January. Like, that event is in January, like mid to late January. So that would totally, what? Nothing. Did I miss something? No. Just the mayor? Okay. So an event like that would completely, like, solidify. And even like a regional qualifier or something like that would totally fit into those realms. 89 courts, Minneapolis, Minnesota, in January, snow.
Well, they got those
4
beautiful
feet deep.
sky bridges that you can walk around
You
the
can walk
entire
through- yeah,
city
yeah,
without
exactly.
going outside and getting fresh
Exactly.
air.
Yeah, when you go
yeah.
outside, your air freezes because it's so doggone
It is
cold,
very
so.
cold. You're right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's all kinds of, I mean, we've turned down dance and cheer competitions all the time too because of lack of available dates. And, they're pretty flexible because their season ends in kind of that September timeframe. So that they can start their season earlier, but they can't end it later. So I think that those would be great opportunities as well for that timeframe.
But even taking into consideration like the mayor's kind of scenario of like competing venues or whatever, I mean, with the amount of, kind of business events that really would like to come here that can't because of capacity, I mean, we could really that would make up the arbitrage there anyway.
And I think the other element to consider too is our major competitor is on the other side of the state, up a little northeast. I might have worked there for a few years. If we go with this proposed expansion, our smallest space would be their largest space. And I think that's going to be really, really powerful in looking at a lot of the regional and state associations that maybe aren't able to grow in that facility when they would come here and be able to grow and maintain the functions of their event.
Kathy?
Thank you to Angie and to the team for excellent work. I really appreciate the outreach that you did with the stakeholder feedback. The sessions were comfortable, just the right size. Everybody got a chance to speak. There wasn't any monopolizing going on, which was nice. So I appreciated that very much. the thing I wanted to make sure that we touch on, which we don't have enough information to be able to give you more detail on, is how could we creatively finance something like this? And so, I wanted to make sure that the potential sticker shock of a project of this size doesn't just sit out there without addressing that there are what are called P3 projects, public-private partnerships that go on all over the country with whether it's local government or city or county government, state governments, and private investors that can come in with creative financing packages to where not all the burden falls on the municipality. In fact, it ends up being quite lucrative in some of these arrangements for municipalities to endeavor into some of these relationships. So we've been having some really great conversations with some key members of the chamber and CVB, Taney County Partnership. So we've been having some conversations about what kind of creative financing package could we put together that's much more palatable so that maybe we could do both of those really big projects in Branson. And man, what a tidal wave of change and enthusiasm and impact that could have. So I will keep the board updated as those conversations progress.
Thank you. Yes, and I talked to a member of the community too about public-private partnerships, and that's actually addressed in the larger presentation that Hunden and TVS Design did as a possible funding mechanism. And, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, if we did both at the same time, the national attention that alone would get us would be incredible. So it's not just like marketing the venues individually. The fact that Branson, a community of our size, is able to do something like that and both at the same time, I think would be pretty incredible and a great story to tell.
Yeah. And the better story, though, is what you just said. Like, I mean, being transparent and knowing that there are opportunities that we can be in a better position because, there have been past things that have happened that, leveraged, the city to the hilt, but, for all intents and purposes, they flushed and worked. But this is something where we don't, if this is something we move forward to, we leave a legacy and not a wreck kind of thing, and or a fountain or something like that, right, Clay? I love fountains.
Yeah. Any other aldermen have any comments about this topic?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Angie, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I had the opportunity to go meet with Angie, and you just get so excited and have so many great ideas, and that is greatly appreciated here for growth. The hockey, I think, is wonderful. I think we were talking when I came. We had two little great nephews, first-generation Americans, born on 4th of July, the first one from Canada. So they're on the ice at 18 months old.
Yep.
They have a little ice rink in their home. And so I'd have to drive them to Springfield all the time, where they have the ice rinks. A lot of people here do play, talking to the skating rink, and a lot of kids play hockey. So to have something like that could be used for hockey, that can be used for recreational skating for our tourists and our residents, and then also figure skating. And then you had mentioned those can be covered for entertainment, to have concerts there. So I think that'd be really exciting. With such an expansion.
Maybe TVS Design could develop us something where there's a polar floor in the exhibit hall floor, right, Paul?
Yes, for sure. You can
Sky's the
make
limit.
convertible floors. Yep. You can do that.
And then with such an expansion, is this something that would be proposed in stages so that it could be used as it grows, or would it all be done as one huge project? I mean, that's looking really out there, but just a question.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think it probably all needs to be done as one, just because of where the building is being built and how it would have to go out and up, and you don't want to, that's going to limit your downtime overall, because if you do it in one phase and then you have to shut down the part of the building to then go up and expand more, my recommendation would be to do it all at once. Mm-hmm.
Paul, you could probably construct this, not affecting our traffic. If you started like at the beginning of January, you could have it done by Memorial Day, right? Maybe not. Any other aldermen? Glenn?
Yeah, so I want to thank Hunden and TVS. I think it's a great proposal that you've got here. It's exciting to look at it. The numbers look tantalizing despite the sticker shock of the whole package. It looks interesting. The one thing, it's been brought up a couple of different ways already this evening, but I think it warrants more amplification, is that personally, I believe the largest impact of our convention center expansion is in Q1. The multiplying effect of driving business into Branson in Q1 is far beyond anything shown on any of these charts. And so, Angie, one thing I'd like to ask is if there is some additional work done on this deck, that we specifically pull out Q1 and focus on it. And then I would ask that you, if we can do that, that you'd consider taking that data over to CVB and say, okay, if we brought you this many more visitors this time of the year, you give us the multiplicative effect for the rest of our businesses in the community, the theaters, the restaurants, all the other things, because they've got that data, they're familiar with manipulating it. I think then we'd start to see a much larger economic impact. That's what's shown here, in both from an overall revenue perspective from the city, but, and we can't think solely about this, but when we talk about funding, we also can't ignore it. We have to understand the tax implications of that multiplicative effect, right? It's going to be huge in the financial analysis. And so we've got to get all the knowledge bases working together here and really nail down Q1 and maybe another month or so into Q2 and have a real detailed analysis just for that.
Okay.
Because I think it's going to be so important to the overall project.
Absolutely, yeah. We work with them all the time on using the DI calculator, which is the industry standard, and so we can absolutely segment that data and show an impact of the Q1 into Q2. Absolutely.
Great, I appreciate that. Then the other thing I just wanted to ask, and I know this sounds strange given where we are in the project, but you know, it's obvious we're pretty much consuming all the property that we've got available to us if we executed this the way it's drawn. Thinking about the next generation that faces the next version of this project, where do we go from here? I mean, if this is largely successful and 10 or 15 years from now, we've got another group of aldermen sitting up here saying it's time to expand the convention center, has any thought been given in terms of how we might accomplish that, where it would go at that point?
I'm going to need them to design it to go up. Unlike the original parking garage that was not designed with expansion in mind, I would love to see it built with the ability to go up. I know sometimes that's hard with exhibit hall ceilings because then you lessen your rigging capacity and all that kind of stuff. But you know, we've got a professional on call here, so I would you know, encourage them to, when they're looking at the design, to design it with that in mind. As far as land, I'm not in land acquisition moving forward, so we would have to look at that
Yeah,
on a bigger
I get
scale.
it. We could always say, oh, we can just get more land, but I
Right.
think that's kind of the cop-out answer,
Well,
right?
and we're running out, like, we've got the
Yeah.
railroad on that side and Lake Taneycomo.
Just ask
and-
us that are working on parking for downtown, and we'll tell you how difficult it is to produce
Yes.
more land.
Yes.
But if it is expanding up, and we've seen this in the parking garage issue that we're facing today, is it's nice to say we could go up, but unless you spend the money and you budget the project to put those footings in and everything else that's needed to do that, and the steel structures and so on, you really can't get there.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, now correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but I'm assuming that we haven't priced this facility with the notion that it could go vertical in future years.
No, we actually have organized the program such that you're not building on top of the exhibit halls at the moment, but we have gone back on projects and built vertically over exhibit halls in the future, most recently on both the Charlotte Convention Center and the Denver, Colorado Convention Center. So it's possible. There is some structural reinforcement that has to happen, but there's creative ways to do that. It does get pretty expensive though when you build up over the existing building. Two other things I want to mention are the location of the headquarters hotel. There there may want to be future explorations where that parcel could be reserved for future expansion. If there are adjacent parcels available for the headquarters hotel that can still have a direct connection. And then the second option would be to expand across Sycamore, but you would, that would involve potentially closing the streets to do that.
I think it might be worth, if there is some additional work on this deck, it might be worth just taking a first pass cut at what those options are. I get the thing about going vertical is more expensive, it always is. But it might also set a strategic direction for us as aldermen in terms of future property acquisition and watching what's happening in the neighborhood so that we ensure that there's a path forward if we can't go vertical. And it would just be nice to know what the footprint requirements might be, what some of the options are, like you say, road closings and things. It doesn't have, I don't think we need it fully detailed out, but we need to have, a couple scenarios that we could just stare at especially as we think about our downtown parking issues. The two might play together quite closely.
Okay, sure.
We also would want to overlay that with the traffic study, right? Because we're going to reach a point where it doesn't make sense to bring more into that area that we have, that confined area.
I picture a 6-lane Branson Landing Boulevard.
All in favor? Okay. Do I need a motion to adjourn this study session? Yes. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you all, appreciate it.
The work that you've provided us is going to help us analyze this. We're going to get great input for our community and look forward to our next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.